kind of overview about PIC. We're going to hear from Brookings about federal opportunities. We're going to have a discussion, talk a little bit about how PIC can help within this space, and then we will close. So hope to have everybody out of here by 10:30. So first, just want to talk a little bit about PIC. Our organization will be celebrating 2 years this September. And we are a partnership with the San Diego Foundation, the County of San Diego, Brookings, and other partners that really came together around this objective and idea about building enduring collaborations. And the way that we believe that that works best, and we've been able to operationalize that internally, is that we are grant and philanthropic funded to do our own research and policy analysis. But what I want to focus on, and what's most relevant to our conversation today, is that we often partner with other organizations, government agencies, community-based organizations, other entities, to go out and build collaborations, to go after grant opportunities, and then we'll often have a role in that grant, whether it's our research team doing some research and evaluation, our policy team doing some level of policy analysis, or some other role for our organization. But again, it's all about bringing folks together and to apply for grant funding. And we hope that, as my colleague Daniel likes to say, we all follow, grants.gov. We all follow, the same resources. And our hope is that we're not just competing over the exact same resources, that we're actually starting to build a bigger pie for, or bake more pies for San Diego. So we've got a rhubarb, a strawberry, an apple. We've got lots of different colors of money and lots of different, flavors of pies for us, for our region. And that will make a more successful, more resilient region. As we know, we've got so many different challenges that we're all collectively facing and trying to figure out how to deal with. And it doesn't do us any good if we're all competing for the same, one pot of housing funding. We all need, funding and resources for housing. Our three kind of core areas are around the economy. We believe that everyone should have access to the middle class. Around the environment, we believe everyone should have access to a clean and sustainable environment. And society, everyone should live in safe, thriving, and inclusive communities. I wanted to show an example of some of the different kinds of projects that we're working on that are within these kind of three different buckets: economy, society, and environment. And then there's a lot of overlap between these three different buckets. And this is really kind of the sweet spot of where we like to be, the type of work that we're most interested in, and where our research and policy expertise really speak to. So we're, in the society category, we're working on things like housing policy. We're working on, as part of a collaboration on a grant called the Community Economic Resilience Fund. This is a cross-border, or San Diego County and Imperial County collaboration to bring a more inclusive economic development plan. It'll build a lot on the SEDS that Steve has been working on, but there's going to be a role for government agencies to play in that role, and so we'll send out more information. I'm sure it'll be of interest to many of you, and how you can play a role in that program. We're working on, within the environment space, things around green infrastructure, climate resilience, economy. We're thinking about job quality, an aging workforce, and a whole host of different other things. And our philosophy and the way that our team works is it's a pretty typical research cycle. So we start with collaboration. Much of what we're doing here today, collaborating. Daniel leads our research team, so we do research, and whether that's GIS analysis, data analysis, we've got robust tools, and we partner often with Brookings on the research components. And then we'll plan on how to develop targeted interventions, or how to implement policy, whatever that will be. And then we evaluate and then bring these programs to scale, often through chasing additional funding. And as you can see from this additional graph, we've got projects kind of all throughout the pipeline. The blue dots are for economy, the yellow dots are for environment, and the red ones are for society. And the size of the dot corresponds to the funding and grant amount. So as you can see, we've got a lot of dots in the research phases right now, but we have projects that are kind of all within this cycle. And these are, again, projects that we are doing internally, where we got grant funding to do these projects. And then these are also projects where we're collaborating with other entities as well. So we've got, what I hope you come away from this slide is that we've got broad expertise kind of where, throughout the research and implementation cycle. And then, we've got Audra in the room, and I want to give, a shout out to Audra of just how much grant money she is, helping our team pull in. So last year, we were awarded $8.6 million in funding, and we applied for about $30 million in funding. And then we've got about $87 million in our current grant pipeline, and we've submitted about $25 million for this fiscal year. So we've got capacity, and we would, again, this is all about baking more pies for our region. And then lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about, why we partner with Brookings. I mean, they are just in the world's most foremost think tank. They've got tons of research expertise, and they are a tremendous partner in everything that we do. They have the inside skinny on everything happening in DC. And so they will bring to our attention opportunities that we don't know about. They also have access to data that we don't have access to. And so it's pretty incredible, some of the information that they're able to pull together. For example, we're working on projects related to climate resilience and risk reduction. And a lot of that is just really analytical, deep data that only Brookings is able to have access to. And again, that's the kind of data where we can pull together and make really interesting, compelling stories about why our region needs more funding, why we are so vulnerable to so many different crises, and we're not just a sunny spot on the southern border. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Brookings for them to give their presentation and to talk a little bit more about what the grant landscape looks like in DC right now, and some case studies as to how examples of other successful regions.
Great, thanks, Emily, and I'm really, really hungry now. I honestly love pie. It's also noon for us, so I'm like, is it lunchtime or do we get dessert with lunch? Anyways, seriously, thank you. It's always really nice to be here. Every time we come, there's more and more familiar faces, so thank you for continuing to be extremely welcoming to us in regions. That's typical, the welcoming part, but that it's personal here in terms of relationships is the difference. So thank you so much for bringing that to bear. It also makes it more fun for us to work here, and it makes us want to work more. And there's been nothing more exciting, at least for Joe and I and our kind of 15 plus year careers than this moment. I think I say this, I'm like looking at Sarah, I'm like, I feel like how many times have you probably heard this from us? Hey, it's a really exciting time in infrastructure. I don't know if you work in Washington. But the fact that has permeated down to, not trying to say San Diego is not special, you're special, but this has actually permeated into every region of the country. Just how big of a player the federal government can be in the built environment, and how much that is no longer as, it is starting to lift the veil, if you will, on how much of a black box or not that the federal government is. And it's really exciting for us to work in that moment. And I'm not just saying it because I'm standing here, it's far more exciting to apply that to a place to help them figure out how can they be as competitive as possible in this very unique moment. So as you can see here, we are nearing the kind of halfway point of what's known as the infrastructure bill, and I'll talk more about it, but really the moment is not kind of hard to see. The first time we came and updated you all, and by the way, we give a lot of similar details, but not in the same extent and without the same back and forth in other places. This is the picture we ran with, right? President Biden signing the infrastructure bill, even though it was bipartisan, right? That it was only Democrats showed up for the bill signing, which gets into Washington politics kind of in a nutshell. We'll talk about the differences in a second. And this is in and of itself was extremely exciting. The administration was talking about it being $1.2 trillion. We ran the numbers, it was $850 billion, but who cares? What's $350 billion among friends? And but the money we were confident was, right, as a country, was going to pour out. But it still didn't feel visceral yet. You know, now when we come today, these are the images you see, and these are all taken just from the past few months, basically, right? So Secretary Granholm of the Department of Energy, Secretary Buttigieg, not Mayor Pete anymore, right? Actually shaking hands and talking about new awards, in this case down in South Carolina. Your own governor, right? Talking about the opportunities to invest in their own climate action plan using federal resources to help make that go, if you will. And finally, in the bottom right, speaking to partisanship, you know, while no one will show up for bill signings in Washington, they will all show up for proverbial ribbon cuttings across the way. So the only one who didn't show up there, just so you know, and I'm kind of putting my own politics on the table, was Senator Rand would not show up, but everyone else was Rand Paul, excuse me. Wow, didn't show up. But that's actually mostly Republicans there, to be really clear. And for those folks who don't know, that's the Brent Spence Bridge in Cincinnati, which was awarded one of the largest grants in the country to repair it. It's one of the most important trade corridors, honestly, in the world along Interstate 75. So that's where we are right now. Things are moving. And the question is, how can you all, not uniquely to you, but certainly you, be part of that process? And if you know, Emily talked about kind of two core missions for today. This is the core message I want to get across to you all over the next few minutes here as we go through, not a ton of slides, is that it demands constant planning and coordination. From multiple titles, from the shortest, the longest ones to the shortest ones in the room. It sounds like many of you are thinking in this way, but it's a persistent requirement, right? Looking one time for grants is not enough. They are dropping so fast and so frequently, and the competition is so steep right now that how can you make sure you have a competitive edge? And just being big and important and yet also having needs, that's not enough. Again, you're not that special. So how can you show yourself to be special to your federal colleagues and then apply some grease along the way? So we're brooking, so the chart portion starts now. Get ready to be a little bored. Let's talk about the lay of the land, right? So IIJA is in gray. I tried to do this sequentially, and it was just like way too animated and weird. So all of it's on the screen, but I'm going to walk you through it. IIJA, that's the first bill. That's the Biden picture you saw, sometimes known as the bipartisan infrastructure law. That is a political construct. That's not a real thing. It's the IIJA, or the some infrastructure law is a little bit safer to say. You can see that was mostly a transportation bill. I don't want to get too much into that now. It will come up more in a second. Then the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, that one does not have a political name, was signed. That, as you can see, was heavily invested in energy-related, but also those other environmental programs. The star that you see up there under appropriations really has to do with the IRA. As many folks probably know, and it's big on the ground, it is functionally largest through tax credits, right? All of the programs, with few exceptions, were not just authorized, they were advanced appropriated. And that's going to come up again in a slide in a second. But that means the federal government actually said all of this money will be put into accounts that DOT, Department of Energy, et cetera, will write grants for. It's guaranteed. Does not matter what happens in ongoing federal budget, including like the what we just had as a national budget debate, right? And if we're going to hit the debt limit, all of that's guaranteed unless somehow Republicans pull the money back. And turns out, shockingly, they also like to cut ribbons. So they are probably not going to pull any of this money back. And that actually gets to the third thing, which is the double star on the bottom there, that kind of jagged line, what's updated JCT estimate? That just sounds like wonk speak. That's the Joint Committee on Taxation. That has to do with what you're kind of seeing as headlines on the right. The Inflation Reduction Act, again, scored roughly about $300+ billion in tax credits. They are already now estimating an additional $400 billion expense on the federal budget from those tax expenses. That is not up $100 billion, it is up $400 billion. These are CBO, Congressional Budget Office estimates, right? These are people whose only job is to make budget estimates, and they were already off by over 100%. The chances, though, and what Goldman Sachs has already published on the street, they think the total expenses for the IRA tax credits will probably near $1.2 trillion. And you'll see in a second why that matters and how long those will last. That is a big deal. And it's a big deal for folks in the region because many of you are not qualified for them, right? Do you actually own the asset that can tap into it, particularly focused on energy, or if for some reason, if you're a government, you have a manufacturing plant? I assume none of you do, but if you did, but if particularly on workforce programming, which we'll get to more in a second, you are absolutely qualified. There is a lot of money here in the IRA, and it is only growing and is inexhaustible. So this is the kind of, these are like, I'm a big sports fan, so like these are the rules of the game, right? This is what we're dealing with. Here's the other way to think about the rules of the game, is how does all of this move? And I know it's really confusing. So it starts first with these big tranches of what Emily already kind of mentioned as formula funding, right? This is by far the bulk of this funding. Some of it goes to MTS, right, in the region, but most of it's going to go straight to Sacramento. They're going to make decisions with it. And it comes in these 5 tranches, and 2 of them have already been delivered. So this is already in motion. You have to spend that money by 2026, really by like 2028. You have extra time to actually like finish spending their money. But they'll cut all their checks pretty much by 2026. That is by far the bulk of that transportation portion of the bill. By the way, if this looks a little busy, that's what we're building up to here. Competitive grants on IIJA, that's the really fun stuff. That's what all of you all are interested in. That's cutting Sacramento out of the picture. You can go directly to your friends in the Biden administration. It is not as large. It's less than, it's like 25% of the bill. To be clear, that's over $200 billion, so it's a lot of money. But Sacramento controls the most. We'll show that again in a second. But those run until 2026, and then they will end. They're advance appropriated. Again, I'm repeating myself on purpose. I know this is wonky budget-like speak. The money's in the accounts. They can only give out so much per year, but then in 2026, and we would safely predict, hopefully we're wrong, the party will be over. We are not going to probably do this again because it took multiple decades to get to this moment, right? Now, the IRA, even though signed a year later, offers the same competitive grants, very relatively like small portion of them. We run these numbers, we haven't bundled them this way. Don't quote me, like between 25 and 50 billion extra in competitive grants, no big deal, not that much. They also, though, importantly, pre-appropriated the money in the accounts, good to go. You can plan on these coming. They also will end in 2026, though, even though it was signed a year later. This gets back to those JCT estimates. Those tax credits, though, they do not end for a long time. And what's nice about tax credits that many of you know, even I'm saying using county tax credits or state tax credits, if you qualify, you get it. You're not competing with anyone. And this is, again, what Goldman Sachs, by the way, Goldman Sachs is very happy with their estimate in the tone on that report, is $1.2 trillion most likely will flow right now on current estimates out of those accounts. And again, we can help you with that, with this information, of course, all that kind of running along with PIC, but the details on each one of those programs and how you qualify, et cetera, right? We're not even done. There's also loan programs, which are massive. Some of these that, and I'm sure some folks in the county and down in the 18 municipalities are familiar with them, what we call TIFIA in DC, the transportation, I always forget what TIFIA stands for. It's like, these are loan guarantees for transportation programs. That's how they're trying to build under a TIFIA-related program called RRIF, or pronounced RIF. All of this is so wonk speak. That's what's gonna get the train from LA to Vegas, right? So these things flow out to places, but there's far more of them, and a huge chunk of them are through the Department of Energy, right? And you've all, especially if you read the Wall Street Journal, Jigar Shah's been everywhere in the past week or two, just talking about how much power this man has, and he really does. And yes, if you're wondering what Department of Energy loan programs, that's both Solyndra, it's also Tesla. So these are real big money loans. Everyone feel good on what's on the screen? It's meant to be busy, but you kind of see the timeline and flow. Awesome. Okay. So what's been happening so far? Well, we're at the rough halfway point. This is, again, the bulk of IRAs and those tax credits, they're just flowing. I'll get to those on the next slide. The overall competitive grant programs are, the federal government has not made it as easy to track them so far, so that's why you're not seeing it. But IIJA, they've done a really good job making it easier for analysts like us to track them. So these are the status bars, if you will, right? And our colleague Caroline, who does so much of this great work, and some of you have met her before, she's just not here today with us, she broke them down by discretionary grants and formula grants. So these aren't on a timeline, these are just things that have left, if you will, the federal coffers, they are somewhere. And you can start to see how formula is kind of dominating the picture. Well, we said we're nearing the halfway point. You can see all these grants, not programs, sectors or subcategories. No things to 50% yet, with one big start exception, as you all probably got news of here in the state of California. The broadband grants, they now know how much is going to go to each state. They basically already knew, and they generally are starting to know where they're going to be invested based on the updated broadband maps. So passenger and freight rail, which I know nothing. I'm just saying I think you all can expect probably something based on Secretary Buttigieg and others' journey on the train there and its coastal needs in terms of erosion and things. But those grants are also still out there with some exceptions that we don't term passenger freight rail, like recent announcements that were made just in New York that we're finally going to get major upgrades to the tunnels into Manhattan. So I know those two look kind of weird, but they're going to be moving very fast soon too. I just mentioned it, IRA. Here's what IRA looks like. The bulk of this is on the manufacturing side. Many of you probably now know this word that didn't exist before called Bidenomics, which is not a real thing either, but it's a good marketing slogan. They're talking a lot about investments in industrial capacity, what's known as industrial economics, placemaking strategies. They go by a bunch of different names. These are the direct IRA tax credit investments that are helping to build new battery manufacturing plants, of course, investing directly in electric utilities, ideally long-distance electricity transmission lines. But you can kind of see what's going on the map. And yeah, quite a bit in California. You can actually see what is often now called the auto belt, stretching from basically in and around Detroit and like down like a backwards kind of J into Georgia, right? This is a White House map, by the way, so we get no credit for it. I really like kind of how they've done this. What's happening in California? We actually did this last time we were here doing a federal update. The map looks really similar because IIJA is in some ways predictable, right? The circles kind of change a little bit. They change in size, but the scale Sacramento circle will never change. It owns the process. And we should get to that at some point here, hopefully even in discussion today, of how do you crack the code on formula? We will say this to every place we go. We cannot repeat it enough. I know it's the actual political network, all of this in lowercase letters, like networking, black box part of it. They own the money. It's theirs. You don't need to call Washington. They have it all. So how do you want to work with them to unlock what they're going to do? But competitive grants are really attractive, and we understand why to apply for them. And you're seeing an array of them across the state. And right, we just wrote down some of the stuff that the right as my iPad finally goes black. Right. So you've got roughly $50 million went directly to the airport in San Diego. $4 million in the city, right, for community wildfire defense grant program for at-risk communities, for whoever was part of that win, congratulations, right? And then the really, really big competitive grant that went to the region overall is this $150 million grant to the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry, right, which is a lot of money, and you all should feel really proud about getting that award. So that's on here actually somewhere, all of it, right? But you can see there's just stuff scattered all over the state, but the scale here is hopefully telling you the story. Okay, this new stuff, this is the new-ish. So what's going on in terms of open applications? Well, you can see by sector, clean energy and power, again, this is just IIJA. This isn't even the IRA tax credits. There's just so much stuff happening in energy. We're going to look back on these years as the thing that's not going to be traditional is how we really started to electrify the American economy and the processes by which we did that. And these open applications are kind of showing you that by sector. On the right, what I want you to take away from that is I wasn't making it up. It's the applications and opportunities are coming like hot and frequently, right? So things are not just opening all the time, they're closing all the time too. So how can you make sure that you find the right flow for yourselves in that situation? And we want to give you just 3 examples of stuff that's open that hits not just, I think, PICS style buckets, but probably a lot of buckets that you all use even in informal framing, right? So on workforce, the Industrial Assessment Center program, and we'll get to something different on workforce in a second, but this is actually a kind of higher end workforce program through the Department of Education. This is actually going to small and medium-sized manufacturers, bringing in experts from actually academia to basically like walk around their plants and be like, here's how you could get more climate efficient, right? Really cool stuff. Total workforce development opportunity for young people, many of whom are going to then end up going into probably being employed by a manufacturing plant, right? So again, you can see on the eligible applicants, it's kind of all over the place, right? Really good, good money, $450,000 to $9 million grants, right? On society, the Reconnecting Communities pilot program, this is a little bit different, but the overall Reconnecting Communities style framework, this is the like, if for those who remember the earthquake in 91, right? But when the Embarcadero came down, right? This is the freeway. This is the kind of natural offshoot of that. This is all kind of sounding weird the way I'm saying it, but like basically, oh, well, that tragic loss of a highway opened up to us. Maybe we shouldn't have highways through downtowns, actually. We have a lot of property value that we're hiding for more suburban commuters. So that is now an official program, but it's coming out in a bunch of different ways, right? So you can get up to $2 million just to cover your planning for what you might want to do. Let's say, I'm just making up, I don't know your plans. I'm saying if you want to do highway caps, and we'll actually talk about those in a second. That's the most frequent kind of stuff, reconnecting your grid. But up to real money for some construction programs too. Then finally on environment, the Clean School Bus Program. This does exactly what it says. So if you want to get electrified and other kind of clean school buses out there. All of these are open like right now, right? If you're interested, you can be applying. If you didn't know about them, you should probably, and I'm saying, and they're interesting, you should think about how could you apply, right? Do you have the capacity to do it? Two more kind of quick slides on this bit. So opening upcoming opportunities by applicant type. The point of all of this, and note how other is almost like skewing the scale here, everyone can apply for just about everything, right? There is a grant for anyone. And Congress wrote it that way on purpose. Again, Joe and I have worked not that long, but at this point, I mean, I didn't used to have hair when I started the job, but I'm saying long enough that this is not typical to see this many types of applicants. They've really tried to broaden who can apply for things. So it's not just nonprofits in your community. It's not just institutes of higher education. Making it just easier for county offices, for local governments to apply for grants. That's what they wanted to do, and you really see that reflected here. I want to leave you with one last example, and huge credit to Karen on the PIC team who also noticed this. It speaks to why it's important to be subscribing probably the same listservs, right? Like we probably were doing the same thing. The just announced like a week or two ago. I mean, this is fresh off the press. Climate Ready Workforce for Coastal States, Tribes, and Territories Initiative. That says what it says. Coastal states, this is for you all. They have you in mind. Critical in that first bucket, right? So this is actually out of an IRA program. Joe, do you remember how much it was, the like total pot? What'd you say, $3 billion or something like that?
It's over $3 billion.
So there's like a $3 billion pot of money. It did not have workforce in the bill text. This is really important because we're trying really hard on separate work we're doing along with like in collaboration with PIC on green jobs. There is so much happening on green job related programming. They're creating programs out of like whole cloth that Congress didn't even intend. So what they've done here, obviously you can see the eligible entities, critically, nonprofits, which of course are essential. Daniel can talk circles around people in a good way on how important they are in the workforce systems, right? They're eligible entities here. Talking about 10 to 20 awards, that's actually quite a good amount. And $500,000 to $10 million, right? Letters of intent, November 30th. So you've got time. And this is, again, that's why I'm trying to give credit to Karen, who already knew about this. Like, getting in early gives you more time to put your coalitions together, thinking about what's your story. How do you make sure you have your money lined up? You know, because these are coming so fast, it's easy to find a grant opportunity, but it closes in 2 weeks, right? Do you really have time to pursue that? That's why we're trying to stress. There'll be some more messages at the end. It's all going to add up, I promise. So anyways, this program, Joe and I were just like, this is awesome. Oh my God, it's so cool. And we're going out to San Diego next week. Like, amazing. So, anyways, this is something literally for you all as a case study. And speaking of case studies, so who's doing the winning, right? We've been kind of talking in the aggregate. Let's get specific. So we have picked 3 case studies on places that are basically like your ilk. It's also your competition, right? And these are going to build up in terms of what's happening in each of them. First, we're obviously starting with Atlanta. As a Southerner myself, although I'm from Florida, so if there's any real Southerners in the room, I know I'm not really a Southerner, but for you all, I'm a Southerner. This is perfect example, different than the California type, right, of a truly later 20th century style development around the automobile. This is what one of their most high valued real estate areas looks like in downtown. And I'm not trying to put my priors too much on the table, but that does not look that attractive. And it turns out Atlanta residents now know that too. So pouring through and ever widening their highway, this is a mix where it's 75 and 85 actually combined. It's just visually speaking, it's a hellscape, even if it's really good for businesses and the state government. I really mean it. It's great for commuters to get there, so they don't want to get rid of the highway, but it's not been good for property development and livability downtown. So what Atlanta's been working on for quite a few years, and there's going to be a theme here, years, plural, right, is how can we restitch, no pun, on what's going on downtown. So they've already won 2 grants just during IIJA, and there's even a slight caveat to that. So the Stitch in that Reconnecting Communities kind of omnibus program I just mentioned, they won $1.1 million to study how they would build this. If you can kind of see that on a diagonal park, that is capping. It's kind of like super, super big dig light, but for anyone who spent time in downtown Boston, and especially if you knew it before, I mean, it is a transformationally different place. That is what they're trying to do here, but not digging and not all the problems Massachusetts and Boston had on that, trying to kind of do it as they go. So it's a big project. It's going to cost, I actually didn't write down, I think it's like a $700 million project, so serious construction. But, right, they're starting to set the notes in the head of DOT officials, DOT bureaucratic staff who have approved these grants, right? They're kind of setting the stage, and they have already won a prior $1 million direct grant through appropriations for it. So they really have over $2 million committed just in federal monies for the planning. Critically, though, you can see they're already investing in safer streets right alongside those downtown corridors, right? And one of, if I not think the largest of the Safe Streets for All grants from DOT, which are constant. They're actually really peanut buttering that one. I don't know if you all won some here. You saw it, San Francisco got 300,000 in it. That was one of the grants we highlighted. There's a lot of them that you can easily get one of those. That's not don't feel shame if you don't. I'm just saying you will get one of those over these 5 years. That's how it's designed. But Atlanta got one of the biggest ones because they really made the case that living downtown is pretty horrible and deeply unsafe right now. So again, multiple years, bringing their congressional coalition together, get you money. Pittsburgh. So as a resident now of Cleveland, Ohio, I both hate and love Pittsburgh. We're like brothers from another mother, or sisters from another mother, as places. Like most of the old industrial cities in America, Pittsburgh both has combined sewer overflow kind of problems. It's got wooden pipes in places. Let's just call it for what it is. It's really old. They don't even know where all their pipes are. They are struggling with making modern investments in their system. So the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority has for years been trying to think about how they can modernize, and this has been a perfect opportunity for them. So they've been awarded, if you go back to that in your head, that timeline, the loan programs which have been re-upped. One of them that was, when was WIFIA passed? It's, a decade old now or so? Something like, yeah. So this is, again, we said TIFIA earlier. There's the water version now called, surprisingly, WIFIA. So WIFIA just awarded them, a month ago, $52 million to modernize their, particularly focused actually on clean water. But the reason they were doing it was PennVest, which is a state entity that effectively advises the state revolving fund, who decides where federal monies and state monies go directly into water utilities. They ponied up $93 million. They had been working for years on what this program would be. So they now have, $145 million to invest in their water system, getting their money up front for their loans. So extremely cheap paper. This is the best kind of capital stack that you can ask for if you're doing financing versus grant funding, right? But again, they have to, WIFIA is highly competitive, unlike actually no one can figure out TIFIA, so it's they're always undersubscribed. WIFIA is highly competitive. So this is a big win for Pittsburgh, and it's no surprise that it turns out their senators, the congressional members from there were way out in front and greasing the wheels on all this, but they've been making the case for quite some time too. So again, just want to, part of this theme on this story, besides just the buy-in of executives, is actually just like the loans are there to help you too, particularly with your utility level anchors who can really tap in to some of these grant programs easiest. Finally, and this is the big one, this is actually a picture of Denver, obviously, from 1965. They had a huge flood, which if any of these pictures feel weird if you're looking at national press of what we're seeing out of Vermont right now, right? It's just, I mean, what a tragedy. I mean, look at all, I can't imagine the toxicity of this flood. We probably weren't even looking at it that much at the time. The Platte River that runs through Denver and Adams County has been known to constantly kind of flood, and of course for the more extreme flood events that happen in the spring during the melt in Colorado. What they have been working on for quite some time is figuring out how to secure the Platte River as it goes through these increasingly developed areas where it causes real damage and continues to flood. I debated putting up a highway-based picture where there's a massive accident, so like real damage to just people, not just their property, because as sometimes happen here, right, just a flash flood on the highway, because just where the highway kind of dips down, right near the Platte River, it just can flood like out of nowhere effectively, you know, with extreme weather events. Denver is a massive winner here, right? So there's no reason to like hide the ball here. They won a $350 million grant from the Army Corps. That is not for port dredging, right? Where Army Corps kind of sprinkles their money around over years and eventually you'll get yours, et cetera. This is something they don't need to invest in, and they did. Now, granted, the IIJA gave them river restoration money, but why did they get it? So I know 350 million is big. 6.5 miles, depending on who you're talking to, is that really short? Is that long? For you know, the point is they secured parts of the South Platte, but what I really want you to focus on is what's on the left, right? 70 collaborators, 14 years of planning, and as we were getting ready here, we've learned there might be some similar age level planning with the San Diego River in this community too. So I actually want to read this out loud. The total cost of the project is $550 million. So both Adams and Denver County, say it like out loud to yourself again, two major counties, one of which is like more populated than the other one, was able to secure, and working together, also came up and has secured, along with state monies, $200 million. But they're paying less than 50%, right, for this watershed, which I'm not trying to get into a federalism debate, but like this is not, again, like a port dredging. This is Army Corps just spending money in the inland area, right? $350 million, it's so much money. So this is what Colorado Newsline said about the program in their reporting. Denver Mayor Michael Hancock convened a coalition of 24 interest groups that signed a recent memorandum of understanding on the project in order to secure federal funding. Signatories include the Colorado Water Conservation Board, Denver Water, and multiple environmental and conservation organizations, as well as business and real estate groups like the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce and Revesco Properties. That is a robust sectoral coalition, right? To get real loot. I mean, that's what you're up against, right? And emphasis here, 14 years. Spent a lot of time on this. It wasn't about, oh, there's grant money now, we should put a coalition together. They are gonna suss out your like quick fix stories pretty fast, right? Is this something you're really committed to? And that gets us to the final part. Am I doing okay on time? Okay. I'm sorry if I crowd out other stuff, but I really am. So what are the common ingredients here? And we broke them up into two categories. There's gonna be 6 coming. It's it's standard, got to count to 3, right? Not 4, for sure. So these 3, they're external facing, right? So number 1, are you aware of what's happening? And I don't mean the like, oh yeah, I heard about some stuff. I mean, are you persistently, consistently aware of what's happening out there, of what's being released, of what different partners in the region want, right? Do you know what's happening? Because if you don't, there are other people, like, I mean, just to the north, right? Only because the former LA lobbyist is now like the DOT lobbyist, if any of you know him. LA knew under Garcetti what was happening. They were paying attention all the time because they paid someone to, right? So are you doing that too, right? Second, storytelling. You just heard this both on the Denver case in particular, but really all 3. Do you have something compelling to say? How do you convince them? They're a bunch of liberal arts people like most of the rest of us, right? Like evaluating these. Tell a compelling story, right? Third, can you demonstrate buy-in? That's why I read this quote out loud, just to kind of look at the extensiveness of it. And it's not just, these kinds of tables are part of how you do that. It's consistent, persistent relationship building, right? Do you really have those? It is so easy to say, or my dad always uses this term like lip service, right? Like, oh yeah, we talk, I know each other. And then meanwhile you go and you're competing, against each other, right? If you think DOT doesn't see when pick 2 municipality heads names in your head, just in the area, that they don't apply, you think they wouldn't see? That you think they don't know where where municipalities are inside metro areas? They're gonna know if you're together or not, right? And talking out of school, we know the staff. They know what's happening, right? It's not that many applications, right? So do you have real buy-in? And here, that leads to kind of internal ingredients. So when I said external, I mean think like Navalgate, like as yourself in the entities you represent. External just to you. Here's more internal stuff. On the workforce side, right? And my colleague Joe again is here, right? And it's really a workforce sector if you want to ask more questions. But do you have enough staff internally to do the work? And we talked about this. Emily already mentioned it too. We know grant writing is hard. If you don't have it, where else can you find help for it, right? But do you have the people? And then critically, where we do even more of our work, if you will, are the people out there on the literal street, not the financial street, that can actually deliver on that work? And this is going to be an emerging problem, and what now the financial street also knows about, because of all that $1.2 trillion potentially in monies out there, we don't know if we have enough workers to build everything. So this is gonna be really important for you all to work on. Second is, do you have the fiscal commitment? And obviously capital stacks become the de rigueur term in philanthropy. I don't know if you all are using that one. That's what we kind of by contract have to speak everyone's language. I wanna emphasize patient there, right? Do you have money that can be committed and say, we're definitely committed here, right? And we will hold the line until we win a grant, let's say. Because the color of money is good from federal, but it might take a while, a couple of years to secure it, right? Only because it's the first name that always pops up in here for federal at a local level. Congressman Peters, I'm sure, is fighting for everyone here. It might take him a couple of years to convince someone, right? On that side of the grease, right? The legal side of the grease. So can you make sure your capital is patient? And then final, and this is every place we've studied so far, and we are excited to study it more. There's a quarterback. And to finish with, I'm also, again, as a Floridian, I'm a huge football fan, so why I picked quarterback as a word here. My favorite thing about quarterbacking is when they win, everyone wins. When they lose, they're willing to say it was my fault, even if it wasn't just their fault, right? Quarterbacking is not about the glory for you individually, right? It's not an individual sport. It's, hey, how can I help lead the team and actually, if you will, distribute the ball, right? They're like a point guard, just really much, much harder, and they get smacked all the time, right? So do you have a quarterback? And it doesn't need to be the same quarterback all the time. It's how do you make sure on any effort you're doing, there's a clear quarterback? It's really easy to go it alone. It's a lot harder to go it together. If you want $350 million like Denver, you need quarterbacks, right? So how can you make sure you got yourself set up for that? But again, these are different and even in more detail. We're learning as we go too. This is a unique moment. Almost no one working really remembers the 1970s period of federal grant making directly to water utilities and things. No one's got the real receipts of process and stuff anymore. It's just war stories. So we're all learning as we go. We think these 6 are popping out, but there's even more to learn here. But the opportunities are big for you all. So we're going to be here for at least another half hour. So I'm saying if you have any questions and stuff, but thanks for your attention, and hopefully this was useful.